Cool. So today we want to discuss TCR. So why don't we start with what TCR actually is?
Yep. So TCR stands for Targeted Charge Review. What that is a bit of Ofgem legislation which sets out the way that suppliers recoup the costs for transmission and distribution charges. And it's coming into effect in two phases. First phase being the distribution part, which is the smaller part of the change, and that's from April 2022, and then the transmission, which is the larger part of the change, coming into effect from April 2023.
So does that mean that the suppliers or they weren't basically charging enough? Is that what is it all about, or why did they come up with it?
Right. So the way that electricity is billed is you obviously have your energy rate, which is a market that everyone talks about all the time, where prices go up and down. But you also have the network charges and green levies, taxation. But this TCR is focusing on the network charges. So that's the distribution and transmission, also known as duos and tenuos. Now, historically, the way that these are charged are built into your unit rates, and they're worked out based on the amount of energy that would be used over peak periods of usage, and that's sort of built into the cost with the consumption profile of that customer, built into the cost which you'd normally see within your day and night rate. So you don't see it particularly separately, but it does make up a key part of your cost. What the TCR is doing is obviously looking at this in a different way. The reason is because large energy consumers have for many years now been able to shift their demand, their peak time of demand away from peak areas, as you would, to avoid paying overly expensive tariffs during peak periods. The problem that's then presented is that not enough transmission and distribution charges are being recouped because of this practice. So what the TCR has been put in place to do is to standardize the way that end users are charged for distribution and transmission to ensure that enough money is recouped in a fairer way.
Okay, so how does this affect any energy bill anyways?
So it affects, so what we're talking about here, just for clarity, is electricity specifically. And the type of electric user that it will affect will be predominantly, where you'll see the biggest change is if you've got a half-hourly electricity meter and you've got a kVA associated with that, that could be several hundred to several thousand, depending on the capacity of your site. So to bring a bit of clarity and context to that, is that if you have a half-hourly electricity meter, you have a certain amount of capacity assigned to it. This is called the agreed supply capacity. Now that's an agreement with your local distribution network about the maximum demand, the maximum amount of energy you can take at any one half-hour period at any one time, and that's set at a value. So these clients who pay for capacity with a half-hourly meter are the type of end user that are going to see the biggest change, the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. All right. So how can we help our clients with TCR?
So, the first question is how the TCR is actually leveraged. So the more agreed supply capacity you have, will push you into a different banding of charges for the distribution. So so let's say you have 1,000 kVA, you're going to pay a lot more than someone who has 100 kVA for TCR. So the first question that always comes up from our clients when we're talking about that is, brilliant, can I lower my agreed supply capacity? Now, with our clients, because this is something that we measure on a monthly ongoing basis, normally there's not a great deal of maneuverability between the amount of capacity you have assigned and the amount that you actually peak use. So no, but on that as well, is that even, let's say, for example, you had a 2,000 agreed supply capacity, but you'd only ever use 1,000, and you thought, okay, well, maybe I can drop it down to 1,000 or 1,200 and I can avoid the full impact of the TCR for that difference. Unfortunately, it won't work because the way that these charges are calculated, it looks at your average 5-year KVA, or your agreed supply capacity over the last 5 years. So you can drop it by all means, but it will not circumnavigate.
It will not fit into the category because they use the like 5 years.
Yeah. Now there are some exemptions on that. So let's say you've recently acquired a site, you've acquired it for the purposes of storage, for example. Let's say you've got a lot of stock you want to store, and the company that was in this place before you happened to be an energy intensive manufacturer. So you're in a situation where all you really need is a light bulb, a couple of light bulbs and a security system, but you've got this big high capacity supply and you've got all these TCR charges associated to it. Then you can appeal with evidence that you've just moved in, this is not the sort of business you are. Then you appeal, and there is a possibility that you can then have that sort of reevaluated, reassessed, and charged appropriately. But obviously, you know, that's quite a specific situation. Most people won't be in that situation. Most people will just be renewing their energy contracts as normal, and need to be aware that this is a factor that will impact their price. So that's really what we're talking to our existing clients about, is being real and saying that this is a change that's happening. This will impact your price. No, there is no circumventing it, because we've already been down that route and established that there isn't a way of doing it unless you're obviously the previously mentioned exemption. So now this is what TCR will look like. This is the impact, and this is what we have to work with from a budgetary perspective.
Is there something that companies need to do specifically? Are there steps, or simply from one point from, I think you mentioned April 2022, is it?
Mm-hmm.
The invoices just will be changed. They will be different.
So yeah, there's nothing that the client needs to do. The client will fall into this by proxy of this changing as a legislation. So the best thing that a client can do is be in the know and understand what that impact is on their cost. So understanding that this is a change that's happening, it's an unavoidable change unless you're going to get rid of the site. And who knows, if you're a customer with a site that has that, you know, a big impact, maybe it's something that will pose questions to the validity, you know, the viability of the site. But what customers need to be doing is having a look at their energy contract renewals. So when these renewals come up, it's not just a case of what the best looking price is. Okay, great, this looks like the cheapest deal. It's fully understanding what that quote entails, what's included, is TCR included, and just saying TCR included is not enough. It's actually saying, okay, is it included? And if so, what are the parameters around that? So what I mean is, have they included it without the ability of reconciling, opening up that contract if they haven't quite forecasted enough, and charging you more? Or are they saying, no, this is the price with the TCR included, and we will categorically not charge you any extra for TCR because we believe that we've forecasted it correctly into our rates. That's really what customers should be doing to better understand the cost impact.
Do you think there will be like mistakes made when calculating TCR? Like, is there something businesses should be aware of? Like, should they be worried about that?
I think it's healthy to be open to the idea that with any new legislation, there is always room for error. both on the client side of understanding what's being presented to them, but from the supplier side of actually forecasting how they price it. Because frankly speaking, you know, we see a vast array of prices from suppliers on a daily basis, and it's quite clear what suppliers are building in TCR and really being quite down the line, straight down the line with it, and what suppliers are building in TCR but being a little bit murky in the way that they do it. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but there are some ways which are clearer. For example, the standing charges have risen quite a lot, but you understand it because that's what the TCR is. There's some suppliers that haven't done that and it's built into the unit rate. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it also makes it a bit, it's not as clear cut, and you want to be really sure that, that there's no reconciliation on the TCR for that. And there are questions around that because, you know, if it's volume weighted and they've built it into the unit rates, what happens if the consumption doesn't come through to cover that? You know, you would need the consumption to be able to cover that cost point. So I can see why some suppliers build it into the standing charge. One thing that you can be sure about, like with all legislation as it comes in when pricing happens, is that some suppliers will get it right, some suppliers will get it wrong. And that's fine, that does happen. However, it's more about how you decide what contract you're going for, what element of risk you're happy with associated with that, and if you feel that that's right for your business. So it might be that you do want to go for a cheaper looking option and are quite happy to take a reconciliation as and when. Or it could be that absolutely not, you know, it's imperative that you understand that your cost is completely fixed and that's how you run your business. And so that's really individual down to the client, but the client can only make those decisions properly when they're presented with the information.
Yeah, so basically TCR is going to be a new element on the energy invoice, right? It's going to be another thing to be checking every month.
You know what? No, it's not. It's not going to be a separate, no, it won't be a separate line item. It will just be a difference in the way that suppliers quote.
That they calculate. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the margin for error here is when agreeing a contract. So we need to always make sure that in that process we're covering our bases. Is TCR included? If so, are there any stipulations around that?
So one more reason to use a broker in future, basically.
Yeah, I mean, of course I'll say that, being an energy consultant, but you know, realistically speaking, there are more and more legislative charges that do get imposed on electricity. And especially with TCR and the way that it's being priced and the fact that it's going from time banded to capacity banded is quite significant. And it is something that does really need to be taken into account when you're reviewing your cost, because there are, you know, we have some examples where it's material, the difference in some respects. You know, not wanting to be a doom monger, it also works in other people's advantage as well at the other end of the spectrum. However, if you've got a half-hourly supply with a significant capacity, you will see that difference being quite large. So you know, as I said, with all things, it's never always easy to give news to a client, oh, well, you're going to have to pay X amount more. But, you know, you need that information needs to be imparted and clear so that you can manage your cost to the most effective way possible. Yeah.
Okay, well, is there anything else that you want to point out, or some last words about TCR?
Yes.
As we close.
I think the last words on TCR would be, and it's more legislative as a whole, is that, you know, with all new legislation, there is subject to change. Sometimes it's that they go back to the drawing board with it. You could get another notification that there's another change. So nothing's ever set in stone. And it's important to also keep your ear to the ground with changes in legislation. The TCR has already had you know, several redactions and statements made from Ofgem, and we're not even in, we're not at the implementation phase yet. So that is something to bear in mind. This is what we know now, and what anyone can ever do is do the best with the information they have at the time that's presented to them. But yeah, stay vigilant and keep watching and reading those updates to ensure that you're fully up to date with any legislative changes.
Good. And if you have any questions when it comes to TCR, please reach out to us anytime.
Yeah,
we'll be more than happy to help. Okay, well, thank you for this, and we talk soon.
Okay, thank you. Cheers now.